Story time with Mr. Julio. Yeah, today, number 11 from Mr. Man Collection, Mr. Snotty by Roger Hargreaves. This is the story of Mr. Snotty and how Mr. Snotty finishes this story not quite so snotty as at the beginning of the story. You see, Mr. Snotty was one of the rudest people in the world. If not the rudest, he was rude to anybody and everybody. So, of course, in Big Town, which was where he lived, he had no friends at all. Not one. Miserable old Snooty, they used to call him, and he certainly looked it. Now, as well as being rude, Mr. Snotty was also rich, very rich, one of the richest people in the world, if not the richest. He had the largest, longest limousine in Big Town. He had the largest, longest garden in Big Town. He had, on top of the hill in the middle of Big Town, the most enormous house, the biggest house in Big Town. And there he lived, all alone, miserable, old Snooty. One day, Mr. Snotty was walking in the garden of his enormous house when suddenly he heard a voice, a little voice. "Hello," said the voice. Mr. Snotty looked, and there, if in one of his hundreds of flower beds, was a goblin. "Are you going to say hello to me?" asked the goblin. "Go away," said Mr. Snotty rudely. "Oh, I know who you must be," said the goblin. "You must be Mr. Snotty who's rude to everybody." Sniffed Mr. Snotty rattly. "Well, I know somebody who wants to meet you," said the goblin and skipped off the way goblins do. "Come on," he called over his shoulder. Mr. Snotty's curiosity got the better of him. He followed. "In there," said the goblin, pointing at a small hole in a tree. "Don't be silly," snorted Mr. Snotty. "Oh, I'm not being silly," said the goblin. "Yes, you are," snapped Mr. Snotty. "I can't possibly get in there." "Ha ha!" smiled the goblin. And then he said a magic word now only two goblin which sounded like "Gluk," or something like that. Suddenly Mr. Snotty started shrinking. He shrank and he shrank until he was exactly the same size as the goblin. "Turn me back to my proper size at once," spluttered Mr. Snotty in a rage. "Shan't!" grinned the goblin. And so saying, the goblin climbed through the hole into the tree. Poor Mr. Snotty didn't know what to do, so he followed him. Inside the tree there was a staircase going down and down. Do you know where it led to? It led directly to the kingdom of the goblins. That's where. "I demand to be taken immediately to whoever is in charge," said Mr. Snotty angrily. "Oh, you shall," grinned the goblin. And he led Mr. Snotty through the streets of the kingdom of the goblins until they came to a palace. "Halt! Who goes there?" cried the goblin sentry at the gate. "I have borrowed Mr. Snotty," said the goblin. "Oh," said the sentry and smiled. "Ho, ho, 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 ho." The goblin and Mr. Snotty passed through the gates and into a courtyard and through some more gates and along a long corridor and through some large gold doors and into a huge room. There, sitting on a gold throne, was the king of the goblins. Your Majesty, announced the goblin, bowing low, may I present Mr. Snotty? Ha! Said the king. So, you're the fellow who goes about being rude to everybody and doesn't have any friends? No sense, said Mr. Snotty very rudely. I can see that. What I heard is true, said the king, looking at the indignant Mr. Snotty. You are much too puffed up with your own importance. Therefore, he continued, I'm going to allow you to be turned back to your proper size. But when you get back to Big Town, if you are rude to anybody at all, you will immediately shrink to the size you are now. Do you understand? The goblin then took Mr. Snotty back through the kingdom of the goblins and up the hasted staircase and out of the tree at the bottom of Mr. Snotty's garden. The goblin looked at Mr. Snotty and said something which sounded like or something which is probably globbly 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 glock and said bad words, and Mr. Snotty grew and grew back to his original size. Now you remember what the king said, warned the goblin. Don't be so snotty in future. Mr. Snotty marched furiously up to his enormous house. The following day, Mr. Snotty was out walking through the streets of Big Town. Suddenly, he came across a little boy playing with a ball. Get out of my way, snapped Mr. Snotty rudely. But as soon as he said it, you know what happened, don't you? Yes, Mr. Snotty shrank and shrank until he was no bigger than the ball the boy was playing with. Oh dear, he gasped, and then he thought, I'm sorry, he said to the boy. What I meant to say was, please could I get past? Immediately Mr. Snotty grew to his original size, and the boy moved, and Mr. Snotty went on his way. Then he met an old lady carrying a large shopping basket. She was late for market. Excuse me, she said to Mr. Snotty. Could you tell me the time, please? No, said Mr. Snotty rudely. But as soon as he'd said it, you know what happened, don't you? Yes, Mr. Snotty shrank and shrank until he could easily have fitted into the old lady's basket. Oh dear, he gasped, and then he thought, I'm sorry, he said to the old lady. What I meant to say was, it's 25 past 11. Immediately Mr. Snotty grew to his original size, and the old lady thanked him, and Mr. Snotty went on his way. Then he went and bought a newspaper from a man standing on the corner of the main street in Big Town. He was just about to walk away when suddenly he stopped and thought. He turned back to the man and said, Thank you. Thank you. Were two words Mr. Snotty had never used before. The man smiled. A smile was something Mr. Snotty wasn't used to getting. Then Mr. Snotty was stopped by a man who asked him if he could tell him the way to the bank. Mr. Snotty was about to say no, when he thought, yes, he said, and told the man. Thank you, said the man, thank you. Were words Mr. Snotty not only had never used before, but had never had said to him before. Mr. Snotty smiled. He felt happy. Happy was a feeling Mr. Snotty wasn't used to feeling. He liked it. And do you know, from that day forward to this day, backward, Mr. Snotty is a changed person. He's still the richest person in big town, perhaps the richest person in the world, but now he had lots of friends and he smiles a lot. And he never gets that shrinking feeling. And do you know which words Mr. Naughty used most of all these days? Please and thank you. So, what we'd like to say is thank you for reading this story. And if you're ever thinking about being rude to somebody, please keep a sharp look out for goblins. Bye bye.